Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm a brand new DM. I'm a dungeon amateur trying to become a dungeon master. I just launched my very first D&D campaign with my party, and I'm going to tell you how the first session went. Okay, so first of all, to start this campaign off, what I did was I wrote a letter from the perspective of an NPC, and I sent the letter to each of the party members before we got together to kind of like dip their toes into the world, that we're getting into, and kind of like dangle the carrot in front of their characters' faces a bit before launching into the actual campaign. So they were all really excited for it. So, and it felt good to know that people were starting to get into the story already, right? Before we even sat down with the board and the pieces and the snacks. So of course we sit down. I get behind the DM screen. It feels if I'm like, oh, I'm getting really nervous and stuff. I'm like, okay, here it goes, this awkward moment where I have to like do a dungeon master thing for the first time, and it went really well. I do have this whole book prepared in which I wrote in my opening narration. I kind of I've planned to the extent where I had most of it memorized, so and I could, like kind of embellish a little bit here and there. And the players seemed really intrigued. So then I began asking them questions, seeing what like how their characters would respond to the situation. And for those of you who didn't watch my previous video, essentially they were all given a letter indicating that they were the last heirs of this ancient order that was sworn to protect this realm called Othermere, and they were instructed to meet at a specific address in order to travel together to this place in Othermere. So they all tell me what their characters are thinking, what they would be doing in the moment. I'm like it was so much fun to get to explore what their various characters were like, and they were a little reluctant, or a couple of them were a little reluctant, but which is fun because I'm like, okay, this is part of the hero's journey. It's like they get the call to adventure. Are they going to answer it? They're going to be reluctant. Of course, it always happens. The refusal of the call and such. But eventually, they all agree to go to this address. At which time they meet the first NPCs that I was going to create for them. But here's the thing: I drew a map of the shopping center, and all this, and I have the whole story of why it's pretty sparsely populated. There aren't very many people there because there's like a tumult in the area. There's a lot of danger in the area, a lot of things going on. No one really wants to be selling goods and buying goods right now. So it was pretty like sparsely populated. I didn't put a lot of thought into the various shop owners and their voices and their backstories because I was like, okay, I'll be okay. I'll be able to just like pull this out of my head. Not expecting them to really spend a lot of time there, given that it was like a between point. I was wrong. I was wrong. I should have put a little more thought into those specific things. However, I will say it was fun to improvise and figure out who these characters were as my players went shop to shop looking for particular items. And I have to ask, if you're DMs out there, when your players find shops and merchants and that sort of thing, if they're looking for something specific, mind you, it's not like a game breaking thing. Like they'd say, like for instance, my player wanted like a two-handed warhammer, and he's like, I really want one of these. I don't have one in my inventory. I want, like, this is what I want. This is my character wants one of these, and I was like, you know what? Like, this is early in the campaign. As long as it's not like some like god killing like weapon at this point, like, yeah, like roll, like I let him roll like perception to see, like, in the shops if he sees anything that like strikes his fancy. And he did, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. But he didn't find a two-handed warhammer because of this roll. I gave him like a one-handed kind of Mjolnir thing that made him happy for the time. But then like later on, when they were at this other location, there was like an armory, and I gave him the opportunity to roll again and see if he could find the thing that he was really after, and he was happy. So I mean, because he was happy, he had a good time. He liked having that hammer. In the meantime, it was a lot of fun for him to use it when time came. Is that the right thing to do? Did I do it? Am I D&Ding? Because honestly, in that moment when he was like, I want this, in my head, I was like, okay, is it reasonable for that thing to exist in this place? Would any of these shops have this thing? Yeah, where there is like a blacksmith in this place. He's still trying to make money, not and such. What I didn't account for, in addition to that, was trying to create weapon stats. Of course, I was like, okay, well, let me just look at like a standard, like a sword or something. I was like, crap, I have to improvise this so it doesn't take 3 hours, and I didn't want to look through the book. I didn't print out a list of various weapons and their basic stat blocks. So I kind of improvised it, thankfully, and he was happy. Everyone was happy. It all went really well. But I, meanwhile, was like spinning. Where I was like, "Am I doing this right? I don't even know if I'm doing this right." But everyone seems fine, so it's good. So we went forward, and once I got past the shops, they were like the whole point of this area was to find this character who was going to essentially be their chaperone, their chauffeur. So they meet this person who is essentially holding up a sign with like the name of their group, and they just to let them know, hey, here's the carrot. So they were a couple of the party members were reluctant to go with this NPC, and I was like, oh God, what do I do if they just like don't bite? I guess we're just playing D&D. We just go wherever they want. I'm gonna do random encounters, and we're gonna I'd like stumble our way through this weird universe. Thankfully, they eventually went. But what threw a wrench in my plan, I accounted for four players, right? Four player characters. And then the NPCs, I had NPC ready. It was like the chauffeur. I had a voice ready. I was like, I know what I'm doing. I know this guy's whole character. I know what his whole purpose in this plot is. And then my friend's brother was like, oh, can I like sit with you guys? And I was like, oh, yeah, of course. But then I was like, I feel bad just like having him sit here. So I was like, okay, you know what? Here. And I like just wrote Kobold, and I gave him a couple little stats, and I asked him to make up a name. So he came up with the name Wigglestacks, and he was a character named Wigglestacks. I was like, "You're the driver of this cart, this carriage," and this other NPC, his name is Scourge the Terrible, calls himself Terry, is going to just he's the assistant of the person in this like fancy house, and he's going to talk to these people in the carriage while they drive. My friend's brother played Wigglestacks, who's also my friend. My friend Brandon played Wigglestacks, and this is a character that I hadn't accounted for, didn't know was going to exist, literally completely improvised this thing, and it just appeared, and it ended up making everyone laugh. And like his interaction with the other NPC was really funny, and everyone loved their characters together, while also hating the main character Terry, like the main NPC Terry, which was so funny because I mean I kind of wanted them to have like a weird response to that, but I didn't expect the hatred that he got from one of the players. Is very funny. So the travel time, I for a second I thought, okay, I'm just gonna like smash cut sort of thing, like where I just jump to where they're gonna go. But I was like, no, that's not. Let's like immerse them a little bit, in the world. So, I planned on having this goblin interaction where it's like a tree falls in front of the car. They have to like, roll strength, to try to like not get knocked prone, in the carriage and all this. And like that whole part went really well. What I didn't account for was I was like, oh no, there are three goblins, and I've like, oh, I have a general goblin voice in my head. I'm like, ah, yeah, I'm gonna do this, and this is what we're doing. And like it was like a silly thing, and I was like, wait, but there are three of them. They all sound exactly the same. So I was like, improvising, I was like, okay, well, on the tree, there's one, he's slightly like bigger in the belly, and he has like the deeper voice, so he's the boss. And I was like, so I had to like, it's so interesting, those little things where I was like, as much as I planned so much stuff, I have like, these names for these people, I just forgot to give them different voices because they're, I mean, they're different characters. What do you guys do? Do you do voices? And when you do you have like a special method of finding voices in the moment? Or is it like I remember, okay, like I know there are some things like physically, like there's something like in front of the face. I'm like, I talk like this, I'm Zoidberg, like that, like, you can do that stuff. I understand, like, oh, you got this big mouth, like you can do like based on their biology, you can kind of determine certain things. Sometimes it's funnier if you don't like for me, I think like Terry, for instance, is a goblin, or he's a kobold, but I made him sound like Mike Shank from the documentary American Movie. So he's just kind of like, "Hey guys, I'm Terry, and this is just what I sound like all the time," and that's just him. So I just really love that guy, and I love that guy's voice. So I was like, oh, I want a character like this. But in the moment, the only voices that come to me, I'm like, I could do SpongeBob, I could do like Kermit the Frog. I'm like, oh crap. Do you do character types? Do you do accents? Do you do a combination of the two? Because what I'm thinking in the future is I might do like a hat where I do various voice types where I'm just like, like French deep voice or French high voice or like, Russian, like, whatever. What do you think of this? Because I also, I'm sure a lot of you stumble with this because I know I stumbled with this. A character, one of the players asked me like, "Hey, what's this guy's name?" And I was like, oh crap, for one of the NPCs that I hadn't accounted for, and I was like, oh geez, yeah, his name is Gregorius, and I was like, just like came up with it, but at the same time, I'm like, it doesn't, it's like, something feels off. Like I don't want him to be like, okay, well, you're clearly stumbling through and you're gonna just say like Megorius next time, you know? Like I don't want to do that. So maybe, what do you think of this idea? Maybe I'll put names and voices in a hat, like together. So it'll just be like Gregorius, like, French or whatever. And I was like, I'll grab it. And, so he's always like that. And of course, I could veto it in the moment if I'm like, oh, I have a better idea for this. This guy isn't Pepe Le Pew. He's, like Bugs Bunny or whatever. So I don't know. What do you think of that? Give me some suggestions for how to pick those things. Because sometimes, of course, it comes naturally. Like there were a couple moments where I was like, oh, I nailed this guy's voice. And I definitely got this. And like everyone's really on board with this character. But there were a couple times where I was like, this is kind of like a generic goblin. And everyone's okay with it. And they don't seem to be judging me at all. But like, I'm judging me and I want to do better. I'm trying. That's what the whole point of this is. Eventually, so we did our combat. Everything went really well. They were rolling fantastic, like fantastically during combat. They were basically destroying these goblins. Although one did get away, and I was wondering like, okay, I like the fact that it gives me opportunity to do things with that goblin. Like if he wants to get revenge, I did plan a like whole goblin camp just in case they wanted to chase a goblin or like if they wanted to like explore where the goblins came from. There is a goblin camp and there are other goblins there to seek revenge. Not that I'm not sure. I have to put some thought into those goblins and like how they would respond to one of their own coming back, not only empty-handed, but with missing one arm and like, not happy about it, obviously. How do you treat stuff like that? Like if an NPC gets away, how often does it come back in the story? And obviously it's like I know it's only if it's appropriate in time and if they cross paths in one way or another, but like it could be interesting to see how this character develops over time, knowing that there are people out there who are capable of treating someone like that and chopping off his arm, and maybe he's going to develop, a strong arm of evil or whatever, But I don't know. I want to say like it's interesting to me I want to know how other people treat NPC interactions and when like villains get away or like monsters get away or whatever it may be. Do they often come back in your stories, or are they just like, yeah, the one that got away, they're off telling a story while they're eating dinner, like, I can't believe I survived that party. But what do you do? Let me know in the comments. So we ended up playing for like 4 hours. So we got a lot further than I expected. We ended up getting to this estate. And for those who haven't seen the first video, there is this order called the Order of Lumia, and they have 4 houses in this place called Othermere, and each of the houses represents a very different city in the larger map. And they're kind of like this like strong order of justice that has maintained peace in the land for a long time. They've like the various houses have gone quiet in the past couple of years, with the only house being active at all is House Cornelius. And that's where these letters came from, and summoning these adventurers to take upon the mantle of these various houses, and they're going to be, if they're so willing, the new guards, like guardians of this area. But it also comes with whatever treasure exists on the grounds of the estate. So they know whether or not they accept the responsibility of this order and the various positions, they are entitled to whatever gold and treasure exists on the estate. So that was kind of like the double-edged carrot that was kind of dangled in front of them. Some of them were like, I want to do what's right, and some of them were like, I really want whatever treasure is there and it's mine. So I was like, okay, they're gonna get there. This is gonna like, if they actually make it to the estate, we get to start the plot, the story, and they get more, So they ended up leveling up after their encounters with the goblins and the merchants and all that stuff. They did get like enough XP to become level 2, which made me happy because I was like, it's way harder to kill them now. I was terrified. Otherwise, when we got to the estate, what I hadn't considered was that one of the players was going to just walk around the estate, like outside, and like look for nature. And I was like, I hadn't considered animals at all, like at all. I was just like, I have the entirety of the interior place like mapped out. I know what exists beyond, like out, behind the building, mapped out. I know the entire dungeon. What I hadn't considered at all is the estate itself and its nature. But he's a druid. It makes sense for him to do that. It makes sense for him to want to ground himself and like get a lay of the land and see what what the creatures would think of the grounds and what the people who occupy it. But I hadn't considered it. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? I had to make up a whole family of ducks. I had to do duck voices and come up with a duck name. I didn't know this. And it wasn't Howard. Well, who am I? Who am I? But it all went really well. I felt really good doing that because I was like, oh, I get to like I get to like kind of like pepper lore into this and kind of like it let them be at ease a little bit with the NPCs that they're interacting with because they were ultimately like immediately just paranoid about every NPC they encountered. Now, is that normal, or are my friends just all as anxious as I am? Is it like, are we all crazy people? Yes. So then, of course, they're going through this estate, and I paint the picture for them. I felt pretty comfortable with how I was describing everything. I was like, okay, I'm feeling better about this. I was a little nervous about this part, but they were all biting. They were all like, okay, and they're interested and intrigued, and they're walking around the various places. But what didn't occur to me, or like what I didn't take into consideration, was the fact that sometimes you can make a puzzle that like has specific clues in specific areas, and if they fail certain checks, I'm like, how do I account for this? Like, how do I accommodate for certain failures? And I did my best to kind of like let them know, like in game, like that these areas were important for one reason or another, but like the thing that they were supposed to see unfortunately wouldn't make sense for them to see. And I still want it to be a game, but I also don't want it to be tedious, like it was so boring. I want everyone to have fun. So I think I kind of peppered those things in early on as they were looking, kind of like getting very mediocre perception checks. And then throughout the rest of the night, there's a time in this campaign in which they get to this tavern that's within the grounds of the estate, because every D&D needs a tavern, right? But they see these four knights behind the bar, and they kind of are told through various interactions, like they piece together that these knights are holding a secret that will eventually lead them into wherever the vault is where the gold exists. I did not imagine the speed with which the players would try to get into that freaking vault. Like, they did not want to explore the rest of the grounds first. They were just like, oh no, we're gonna figure this out. And they were like trying to figure it out. And I was like, thankfully, I was like, oh, it's closing time in a tavern, obviously. I was like, why didn't I think of this? Like, let's kind of like show like they can come back later. They can try to come. I kind of let them know above table. I was like, you can try to come back once they're closed, but like the guy who's the bartender is definitely going to kick you out of the tavern and lock the doors until, then he cleans up, he'll leave, you can try again later. Like I let them know, like that's just the reality of this estate, and that's how it functions. So of course it's going to continue to function like that even when you're here. So I think it made sense without feeling like I was railroading them or like pushing them too much. I was just like, all right, look, you can do this. It's just not now. It's not feasible right now given the situation. So that did lead them to go explore more, which led them to find the armory and find more weapons, find some magic items, which is another thing. Do you let players roll to find not specific magic items? Like what do you have favorite magic items? Give me some like tips for stuff I can give the party, both like as a reward for beating a dungeon or something that they can take, from like a specific encounter. Like, what are some fun magic items? Because so far they found some magic beans, and I also created this magic mushroom thing, which will like let them jump 50 feet and land safely. Like it kind of attaches to their shoes and they can jump. I don't know. I just was trying to come up with something funny in the moment that didn't seem like it would break the game, So I did that. It was fun to improvise. Thankfully, all the players went around to their various rooms. They explored and rolled well enough to find the various clues and like puzzle. Like I had a couple minor puzzles to help them put pieces together as to how to solve the night puzzle, which essentially they had to learn to line up their characters with the specific knight that was associated with their character type, because it was one of their ancestors, and they like touched hands with the thing, and it created this doorway that opened up, and they entered the dungeon. So we got into the freaking dungeon on the first session. Got into the dungeon. I'm so psyched for this because I did not expect to get this far, and I'm super happy about it because I was worried that it was going to be like, oh, we're going to be in this freaking tavern just talking to random people and like learning about the town for 3 sessions. And like, I'm glad it wasn't that. I'm glad they were like, no, we're going to figure this out. And they did. They did a good job. So we got into the dungeon, and then once in the dungeon, oh my gosh, they happened to discover this hole that I did create that exists for a reason, because there are kobolds that work for this estate that have found their way into this vault and are trying to steal the gold. It's a series of the thieving kobolds who are trying their best to solve the puzzles and various riddles, that exist within this dungeon, and they're not doing very well, but they keep trying. So anyway, there's a hole there. The party got so hung up on this hole, so hung up. They wanted inside that hole so bad. It was so gross. You know the jokes they were making. You know all the jokes. It was a very tight hole. I have a very big party. Oh God. So eventually they make their way through these corridors and with spider webs and all this such, and they they're being very loud. So I got to attack them with some kobolds, and they rolled way too high, guys. Oh my gosh, I did not account for this. I should have thrown more kobolds at them, but I didn't want to. I didn't want the whole. I wanted them to explore a little bit more and like learn more about the dungeon if they could. And like I thought it was fun for them to fight like three of them. But they just rolled so high that they just like basically decapitated these kobolds and like destroyed them. They did take one captive though, and then at which time they asked it like they asked the questions and I had to improvise because I was planning on Terry, the NPC that they met and whom they a couple of them hated. I was planning on him being the one who was behind this whole plan to steal the gold. But then it occurred to me that it would be really funny if it was just Wiggle Stacks. So it's this NPC that didn't even exist prior to this session, who is now the big boss of this Cobalt group. So they're essentially going to think that he's the big bad of the thing. He's not, but they don't know what it is. I'll tell you what it is next time. They explored a little bit, just enough to see this obelisk that had various carvings into it, as if something needs to be placed on each side. They're going to be keys of a sort. So the next session, there are going to be four puzzles that they have to face, and I really hope. I know that they've already uncovered all of the clues that they need in order to solve them, and I'm going to remind them like if they need like the things that they have seen, or experienced because they did it. Like they went through the whole estate and kind of like they were very perceptive and very aware of their characters. It was all very fun. We had a great time doing it. They freaking laughed the whole time. They had the best time killing the kobolds and the goblins, of course, and then like solving the puzzles. I could see like they were like really excited. So it makes me so happy that like I don't know, like each puzzle. I'll explain the puzzles in a future video, but each room has two puzzles at least, and I hope they're fun. Let me know. I know some people think that puzzles are like tedious and such, and they can be. Definitely can be. In the next video, I'll describe the puzzles, and you let me know what you think in the future video. But anyway, let me know some of your favorite puzzles and some of your favorite traps and like dungeony things that you like to throw at your players because like I can use that in our next session for sure. Okay, for the first session, the things I learned. I learned that having voices and names ready helps a lot. I'm going to make some sort of cup or hat, and it's going to have like random names and like voice types, so I can just pull just in case nothing comes naturally. I mean, if I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh yeah, his name is Waltron, and I just start talking, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm Waltron, like, and it just comes naturally. Like that's who Waltron is. If not, I'm gonna need a piece of paper. Otherwise, organization, oh my gosh, it helps. Like having this helped me a lot. I needed that. I taped stat blocks to various encounters on my D&D screen, like my DM screen, and that helped. Like as soon as they went to the goblins, I was like, "Oh crap, wait!" And I was so happy I had done that, and I almost forgot for a second. I was like, "Where's my book?" I don't need it. And I just look forward and I was like, this is perfect. And I'm so glad I did that. I kind of want to do that with the characters' spells as well and like know what their damage is and everything so they don't have to look it up every time. Although it's their responsibility, it's nice and it kind of speeds up the game if I'm like, oh, I think that's a blah, 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 or, 1d8 or whatever. I learned that like as much as the characters like to kind of play with like push the edge of the sandbox and play and see like where the boundaries are, they're not going to be monsters, or at least like this party seems like they're not going to be monsters. They're going to see what they can do, but they're also going to like kind of follow the carrot. They're going to find the plot again. Like they seem intrigued enough and curious enough and interested and like they're enjoying it enough to follow this plot, and I'm so thankful because I was terrified. But anyway, that's how our first session went. It was a complete success. I'm so freaking happy, and I'm looking forward to the second session. I will make a future video. I'll let you know about those puzzles and like some of my concerns about it, and hopefully you guys have some tips because you were very helpful the first two videos. Thank you so much for watching this. I'm sorry this one's a little longer, but obviously it was a lot happened, so I'll figure out a better way to make shorter videos for the future sessions. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any future tips, and thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you.